the political side of it, and then there's the real story.
There's a lot to unpack right there. It wasn't quite the interview I thought that was going to be.
There's a reason for it.
This will be officially my favorite podcast I've ever done.
Congratulations on the Baltimore Orioles. I know that is
Thank you.
a team you grew up loving your whole life. I think about your first and only bet. That's what when he bought the Baltimore Orioles, I thought to myself, well, his first and only bet was that the Colts would beat the Jets, and that didn't work out. So, and now you definitely are not allowed to bet on baseball. So, how did you get in a position, not economically, because we know you're super successful, but how did that come about, you being able to buy the Baltimore Orioles?
Okay, let me explain. I'm from Baltimore, and I moved away from Baltimore when I graduated from high school, so I can't say that I was paying that much attention to Baltimore or even the Orioles over the last 50 years. But Baltimore's had some challenges, and many people from Baltimore who are business people, who are friends of mine, with whom I kept in touch over the years, said that the ownership group there was not that well liked, and that maybe they would be open to selling. And I didn't really know that I wanted to go buy a baseball team, but I thought about it. But I didn't really do anything, and then I thought about teaming up with somebody else to buy it, and then that effort didn't really work. And then the owner of the Orioles came to see me last August and said he would like me to buy a minority stake in the team. I'm from Baltimore. His mother had seen my TV shows, she'd read my books, and she thought I might be a good owner. And I said I might be interested, but I'd like to buy control eventually. And he said, well, why eventually? Why not buy it now? So we worked out a deal over 6 months or so where I would buy control with some partners that I brought in. And now since the opening day, I've been what the baseball people call the control partner. In other words, if something goes wrong, I get blamed for it.
Got it.
And I have spent a lot of time in baseball in the last couple months. I've been going to games more than I would have thought. I'll be going to a game tonight at New York, at the New York Mets we play. And I've enjoyed it a lot. The team has done quite well, but not because of anything I've done. It's just it was a pretty good team when I bought it.
Was that like a boyhood thing you'd ever thought of doing? I mean, before you did it, did you ever think about buying a baseball team?
Well, I'm honestly not really, because when I was a boy, I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player. But then when I reached 9 or 10, I realized my athletic skills were very, very limited. And so I wasn't going to play baseball as a professional. So I then went on to other things in my career. But many of my friends in the private equity world, and you know the private equity world as well as I do, many of these people have gone into professional sports and bought teams in recent years and have done reasonably well financially, and the teams have done well also. So I thought as I get towards the latter part of my life, if I'm going to check all the boxes, maybe I should check buying something in Baltimore, give back to the city a bit, because I view it as a somewhat philanthropic endeavor, because I'm trying to help Baltimore, re-energize Baltimore in some ways. And so that's what I decided to do, and I've done it.
So you write a lot. I mean, I think you write a lot more books than most people, and I consider one of your shows, I believe it's Peer to Peer, the Bloomberg show, which right. I have never missed a single episode. They're some of the best interviews I've ever seen. I think I probably have rewatched the Warren Buffett interview. I've rewatched the Jeff Bezos interview.
Well, those were good.
I'm having a brain fade. Barry Sternlicht, you did Barry Sternlicht, I believe.
Barry Sternlicht, sure.
For sure. And by the way, we're gonna give away some of your books. We're gonna give away to people at the end of the show, and we're gonna talk about The Highest Calling. But I'm fascinated with. I know your resume, not super well, but well enough to follow you. And I just discovered this morning that for some reason I didn't have you on Twitter, but I have you on every other platform ever. But I'm curious as to how the heck you do it. The laundry list of things like the Kennedy Center and trustees of colleges and the Magna Carta and all the things that you do. I mean, I'm a busy guy myself, and I consider myself, my day's pretty full. And you make anyone I've ever seen look like a schoolboy, like that they don't even really have a schedule. So I was curious as to where you found the time to even write a book.
I don't play golf. That saves a lot of time. I don't drink alcohol. That saves a lot of time. And I don't need that much sleep relative to what your doctors say I should be getting. So you're supposed to get 8 hours of sleep, and I can get about 5.5 hours and get by reasonably well. So, but also everything I'm doing, I want to do. In this stage of my life, I don't have to do anything. So I'm doing things that I love doing. And when you love doing something, it's not work. So I just feel, privileged to be able to do these things. And in many ways, I'm motivated by, like you, no doubt, to give back to the country. I came from a relatively modest background. And in this country, I've been able to rise up to do things I wouldn't probably have been able to do elsewhere. So I feel privileged every day to be able to do these things, and I just can't wait to do more.
I would say
my only regret in life, honestly, is that my parents did not live to see some of the things I've done. My parents did pass away about 5 or 6 years ago, and they saw some of the things I've done. But as you probably know, I don't know if your parents are alive, but what is stronger than the appeal of a parent to a child? And my parents I was their only child, so I wanted them to see as much as I could what I accomplished. But they did reasonably well, seeing what I did. But I wish they were still alive now.
Okay, well, let's put this in perspective. When you were 27, both your parents were alive, right?
Correct.
Right, and you worked for Jimmy Carter, you worked for the President of the United States. So I think your parents saw you achieve a certain level of success when you were 27. Like, if it starts there, you could stop, and your parents would have been immensely proud of you. So, like, I get the humor, but like your parents have seen you. I've got to assume. Like I said, it was going back to your resume. It's pretty amazing.
My parents were blue collar workers. Neither graduated from college or high school, and so they had very limited ambitions professionally, and they had limited ambitions for me. They didn't. I was their only child, so they were happy with that, whatever I did. And I got lucky getting a position in the White House and did it for 4 years. And so many other things I've been able to do. I've had a lot of luck and a lot of help and support. So as you know, luck is an important thing in life, and I've been very lucky in many ways.
I said you're an articulate writer and an articulate thinker, and I just wanted to ask you before we get to the book. I feel like we're living in like a time warp, and I wonder if you're experiencing the same thing I am, which is that you see the dialogue about the current Democratic, what will be the nominee in a couple days, or I think she is, sort of not being elected, but she was the vice president. The whole process that's happening and the drama. And I recall a time, and I don't want to be longing for a better time, but I recall before watching Reagan and Carter and Bush and Nixon being more diplomatic. It was like a more, I don't know if the word's loving, but gracious, or not as violent in terms to each other, in terms of wording. I'm curious as to what you think of the current state of what's happening with Biden being out and her being in, and what appears to me, and I apologize if you don't agree with me, or at least can understand my thesis, that we're all kind of being gaslit, that we didn't kind of see this. Because a year and a half ago, you were hearing that she shouldn't even be on the ticket, that she would be a drag to Biden. Now she's the nominee and what looks to be the anointed one. I'm curious as to someone like you who understands politics probably better than anyone. What do you think?
Nobody really anticipated what would happen. You're correct in suggesting, let's say a year ago, the conventional wisdom, which is often wrong, but the conventional wisdom was that Donald Trump would not get renominated because he had a lot of legal problems, he'd been indicted and so forth, and the Republicans thought a new face was appropriate. And that thinking was wrong. The conventional wisdom was also that Joe Biden would be the nominee. There really was no opposition. And that Kamala Harris, was she going to be kept on the ticket or not? Probably kept on the ticket, but she clearly had not had as major a role in the administration as maybe she wanted to have. So just think about it. A year ago, we were thinking Biden could pick another person as vice president. He certainly was going to run again. Nobody was really challenging him. And Donald Trump had all those legal problems. Now we find a situation where just after the debate, right after the debate, people thought Donald Trump is going to be elected by a landslide, and Joe Biden can't possibly, catch up. Now, just a few weeks after that, we find a situation where people are saying that she's going to be elected president, and Donald Trump has a hard time catching up unless he does some things different. So the world changes very quickly. and the people you refer to, I would just say that every time in history, people always say it was always better before. In other words, 100 years ago, people would say to their children, you're not as good as our generation. And 200 years ago, people would say, you're not as good as our generation. Every generation thinks that it's living through tough times, but that the previous generation didn't really was better. And so, right now, I would say, in my own view, it's a toss-up election. It's down to 7 states, the 5 states that Hillary Clinton lost, and that Joe Biden won, plus probably North Carolina and possibly Nevada. Those are the key states. And right now, it's a toss-up. Despite what's been going on, right now, the polling data does not say that Trump is getting clobbered in those states. It's some he's behind, some he's ahead. So I just think it's too early to say. And if you were to go back 8 years ago and to say who was going to be president of the United States exactly right now, you would probably say Hillary Clinton, because she was a way ahead in the poll.
She was
way ahead.
Yeah.
So who could predict these things? Nobody really knows. I just say that's what makes democracy so interesting.
Well, I do agree with you that every generation thinks that the prior generation had a better time and they long for the old times and stuff like that. I've heard this analogy. I agree with you. There's always like, it was better before. Maybe
Right.
It was better when we didn't have social media. I remember when we didn't even have call waiting, or you had a dial, there's always been this advancement. But do you think that the hyperbole around democracy at risk is true, or do you think it is at risk, or do you think the actual argument about us debating about who's going to be president and the process actually means democracy is stronger right now? Where do you kind of lean on this?
The country has survived. We're getting ready for 250th anniversary. And over the 250 years, people have always said the country's got real risk here. We're not going to get through this problem or that problem. There were many people who thought that because of the Great Depression, the United States would become a socialist country. And so that obviously didn't happen. So I would say that the checks and balances in our system are so strong that I think it's unlikely that one person could do anything to ruin or destroy our democracy. On the other hand, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to make certain that the checks and balances are not working. So I think most likely it's going to be the case that whoever is president is going to have to deal with a Congress that probably won't do everything they want. And it's very rare to have a president and the president and the congressional houses, Senate and House, be the same party. Increasingly, that's not likely to be the case. So I think there's checks and balances. I don't think democracy is going away, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be vigilant about it. And I think we should all recognize on both sides that there's always challenges to democracy. The biggest risk you have is if one party controls the White House and overwhelmingly controls both houses, then you don't have a big check on democracy.
Do you have a favorite president? Since you wrote this book, do you have a favorite?
We've had 46 people serve as president of the United States. One person served as president twice, Grover Cleveland, but not consecutively. And sometimes he's counted as an extra president. There's no doubt in my mind that one person is by far the most important president we've had, and that's Abraham Lincoln. It's trite to say it, and it's not like it's a novel thing for me to say, but Abraham Lincoln kept the country together. Many people in the North said, why do we really want to fight the South? If they want to break away, let them go. Those people often were very powerful politically, but Lincoln said, no, I'm going to keep the country together. Now, the result of it was a civil war. We lost 3% of our population and maybe more in non-combat situations. And it was a brutal situation for many, many years. However, I think we're better as a country today having had the country together. Lincoln held it together, but he did it with humility, with grace, and with humor, too. Think about it. You write and I write, but how many people, including you, both of us, could write something like the Gettysburg Address, 272 words, which basically illustrates what democracy is all about and what the United States is all about in just such a pithy way. The same thing is true with the second inaugural address. Lincoln had a way with words that maybe somebody educated doesn't have. He didn't go to college, he didn't go to high school, he didn't go to grade school, yet he managed to become a great writer and a very eloquent person.
Yeah, for sure. You were in 10th grade when Kennedy was shot,
Correct.
And I think I read somewhere, was that what attracted you to politics, or was I incorrect about that?
Well, it's interesting. That was one of the things, but my sixth grade teacher, when John Kennedy gave his inaugural address, she spent a day going over it with us and trying to explain why it was such a great address.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
I didn't think I fully understood it, but it did sink in. And obviously, I got interested in politics because of the charisma of John Kennedy. And he said, come help their country and serve your country. And I did that. And I went to work for Ted Sorensen, who was their speechwriter, who helped to write the inaugural address. And he was a lawyer in New York when I graduated from law school. And I went to work for him for a while. I was explaining this the other day to a woman I met just by happenstance on the street in Nantucket. And she told me that she was from Baltimore. And I said, wow. What neighborhood? Same neighborhood as me, same school as me. And then she told me her mother was a teacher there. And I asked her what her mother's name, and it was my sixth grade teacher.
Oh, wow.
So I met on a street in Nantucket the woman who inspired me, the daughter of the woman who inspired me to want to learn more about politics. So how does that ever, how does that happen very frequently? It doesn't really happen.
It doesn't. It doesn't. And by the way, you, as I said earlier, I'm a fanboy of yourself, and so I'm going to ask you some random stuff about.
Sure, go ahead.
How to invest. You narrate your audiobooks. Have you always thought that you had a good voice? Did you always think that you could do that when you were growing up?
I did. I don't think I have a good voice. I'm completely tone deaf. I can't sing. But I thought that the books that I do, I have interviews, and with in the audio version, I put in the actual interview that I do with somebody, and I just thought it made sense to have me do the audio part of the part I wrote, as opposed to in addition to the question. So it's not an easy thing to do. If you've ever done it, you got to sit there in front of a recording machine for hours on hours and kind of read this stuff, and then the words blur, and in the end, you keep repeating yourself over again. You make mistakes. So it took me about 8 hours to do this most recent book.
How many books have you written?
This is my fifth book.
You got a favorite?
Well, I guess I should say the most recent one, because I want people to read it. But I guess the one on leadership, I think, got a lot of attention, and the one on investing got a lot of attention for sure. But I don't know if it's a favorite. I'm now thinking about what am I going to do next. Whenever I interview some author, at the end I always say, "What's your next book?" And I'm always surprised at how many times authors really have it pinned down. They already know what they want to work on. And sometimes authors already say they've already started working on it. And I've been thinking about what I should do next. And I've thought about a book on, one of them is kind of explaining the Declaration of Independence in a better way to the average American, because as we get ready to celebrate the 250th anniversary, I don't think most people really know what's in the Declaration, why we make such a big deal about it. And a second possibility is a book on sports ownership. In recent years, as you no doubt probably know if you read the sports pages, people are buying sports teams left and right. It's a big business these days. I jumped in myself by buying the Baltimore Orioles. And so I've been thinking about, what about a book about interviewing owners of teams? Why are you now the rock stars of the business world as opposed to other kinds of investors? And why do you get more attention sometimes than the athletes themselves? So I thought about that, and maybe that'll work out.
Who's you've done peer-to-peer and a couple other interview shows. What's your favorite interview?
The favorite interview I've done is probably, I guess I would say Jeff Bezos was really good. And the reason he was good is because he has a good sense of humor, and I did it in front of a live audience. And when I use humor, and which I like to do, and you have a live audience, it can work out well. So, for example, there's some people I will ask a question to that's a funny question, but if it's not an audience, they won't really laugh, and they don't get the joke. For example, when I've interviewed Bill Gates one time in his office, I said, "Bill, do you think you would have been more successful in life if you had a college degree?" Obviously a humorous question, but he didn't get the point, and he just gave me a serious answer. When I asked him the same question in front of an audience, people laughed, then he realized it's a joke. So I like people like Jeff Bezos who have a pretty good sense of humor. I think Warren Buffett was a great interview. Oprah Winfrey the best thing she said was, David, I'm not that good an interviewer, but I'm a good listener. And that's really important. When being an interviewer, you have to listen to what the person's saying and then pivot off of it.
Yeah, I kind of so I said I've watched all your interviews, and I thought one of the funniest things you said to her was that you were going to try to do what she did. So because you're like, hey, I'm interviewing who I think is the best one out there, and I thought that was good banter. But one of the things that I get reminded of with you, I don't know how to, I've never been able to explain this is the case, right? But I went to see the producers, and I guess I was naive or clueless at the time. I was getting a divorce and I was dating another girl, and she was an actress, and she said, I want to go see this thing, Producers. And for some reason in my universe, I guess I was too stupid to not ever heard of it. And it was a play, it was in LA, and Martin Short was in there. Yeah, okay, so I'm watching it, I'm good seats, and I didn't read the playbill, and I'm astonished at what they're saying. Like I'm like, who made this play? And how is this possible? And why is this person even allowed to be like? Why would this person not be run out of town? Right? It's horrific if you actually listen to the content. Right? Springtime for Hitler in Germany and all this other stuff. And then I can't believe it. And I'm looking behind me and everyone's laughing. And I look over the corner of my eye and there's Mel Brooks. He's actually watching the play. And I'm like, okay, it's got to be okay. So that makes sense, right? One of my favorite movies ever is History of the World Part 1. And there's, what do you call your humor? Because I think the stuff that you say is so funny, and it's because it's contextual. You have to sort of know the reason why it's funny. It's my favorite humor. That's probably why I like you to be interviewed. But did you know that this was your sort of style, which is that you're telling a joke in which the person had to understand the underlying meaning? It's just not. It's Mel Brooks just where he's delivering a line where you have to know why it's funny, like the Inquisition, what a show. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Look, humor is something that you either have or you don't have. And, I have what people call a dry sense of humor. So when I ask people a humorous question, obviously I don't laugh while I'm asking the question and just use a deadpan kind of look. And generally, sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. But I just a style that I have. And, I didn't try to be a stand-up comedian, but I think I do have a reasonably well-developed sense of humor for a business person, not for a stand-up comedian.
I think you do too, for sure. I was curious about when I get to work almost every morning. I have 718 employees. I don't have what you have, which is like thousands. Right. I know you're the co-chair now, and I don't know how much day-to-day you have with Carlyle. That's not what I'm asking, but like when you were really active with Carlyle, like you're most active, did you wake up to something every single morning? Do you consider yourself like a fireman like I do? Or were you a big thinker? Because I know one of the interviews I saw with you was that you traveled over the world, hundreds of days a year, raising billions of dollars of capital for your funds, right? But in that role, did you have sort of the chaotic, like every day when you have this many employees and this many companies, did you have that fireman mentality or no?
Yes, in a sense that I conceived of Carlyle and started and recruited everybody in the beginning. I didn't have an MBA or investment skills, so I recruited people that did, and I said to them, I have an idea. The idea is we'll build a global private equity firm with many different disciplines, not just one kind of thing like buyouts or venture capital. We do many. So to actually get that done, I had to go recruit people who could run each of the funds and then raise the money. And so to raise the money, I went around the world many times. I was on a plane. I would fly an average of 800 hours a year and visit on the average probably 40 countries a year. So it was fairly relentless to do that. And every day you wake up and you say, okay, what country am I in? And who am I going to speak to? And you just get your bearings down and then eventually go ahead and do it. It turned out that I was reasonably good at fundraising and reasonably good at some other things. I wasn't a great investment professional like the traditional guys were, but we built a very large global firm. So I enjoy it. I stumbled into it. I didn't think I would do this. When I was growing up, I thought I probably, might be a lawyer in Baltimore initially, and then maybe want to be a lawyer in Washington. But I didn't really think about business or any of the kind of things I've done. I never thought about collecting historic documents, collecting historic books, fixing monuments, all the stuff that I've done, I stumbled into it. I didn't have anybody advising me. I just kind of came up with ideas and went ahead and did it. So, for example, what you're doing now, I assume you came up with the idea of doing this.
In terms of my own private equity firm?
Well, your podcast.
Oh yeah, I mean, I came up with my idea of doing it because I basically like to talk about my philosophy, but I really like to talk to people who've done something, who have taken risk, and it's the epitome of, like, if you put yourself out there and you take risk, it's one of my favorite topics. I actually have a movement called Risk On, which you've heard that term before. Right. It's a Wall Street term. I started working on Wall Street when I was 20. And the R in relationships for Risk On is the most important thing, and invest in yourself and stay your own course and know your competition and own your own mistakes and never give up. This philosophy of interviewing people that have done that. And it's interesting because it probably leads to my next question with you, which is that I remember when I first started raising money, I considered it to be really difficult. And I remembered, like, hey, if I raise this size of fund, it would be a massive success. I've raised probably $600 million the last maybe 5 years, nothing compared to what you do. But I remember the story of Pete Peterson and Steve Schwartzman saying they did 400
right.
pitches before they got a commitment from Prudential. Was it like that in the beginning for you? Did you have to do a lot of pitches to get to scale?
Yeah, Steve Schwartzman would say that they only got 3% of their initial, I think, fundraising requests honored. In other words, 97% of their pitches didn't work, but they finally did get Prudential, as you know. I was not a skilled fundraiser. I never asked anybody for money, and I had probably the traditional view was, I apologize for asking you for money. Well, I always say, if you apologize for asking for money, you're not going to get very much money. So you have to actually believe in it. But I ultimately made myself into a fundraiser, learned what it takes to do it. And the trick, as you probably know, is not the presentation, but it's the follow-up. Nobody gives you money in the meeting. You got to follow up appropriately. Early on, I stumbled and made a lot of mistakes, but I wasn't raising big money in the beginning. I'm going to friends and family and people I knew. When I start, raising money in China or Saudi Arabia or Chile or other countries where I didn't have a base, that's more challenging because, you don't know these people and you have to really know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I remember watching an interview with you, kind of admiring the idea that you traveled so much and you had built such scale around the idea of raising capital. It kind of, it was pretty inspiring. But when people see you go from here to there, the work in between is just, it's the enormous amount of work. I can't imagine the amount of work you had to put in for what you did. Let's talk about the book. What's your favorite part? I mean, you were already a bestseller. Everyone's going to read it. I mean, it's not like people aren't going to be pretty excited to see what you have to say. But, what's your favorite conversation?
Well, I interviewed a lot of presidential scholars, and then I interviewed some presidents. And, I think some books I interviewed people about are not books that are that well known. So I'll give you an example. Somebody who worked with me at Carlyle, Richard Darman, who'd been the head of OMB under George Herbert Walker Bush, and later Deputy Secretary of Treasury under Ronald Reagan. He joined Carlyle, and eventually, unfortunately passed away. His son was a gifted writer, and his son developed a book. His son is Jonathan Darman, and he developed a book with a thesis that I thought was interesting. It was that FDR was actually when growing up, was a dilettante, effete, not really considered a smart guy by his peers. Yet, how did he get the toughness to be the most consequential 20th century president? Well, it was the polio. Had he not had to struggle with polio, the thesis of Darman is, he would not have been able to become president or been very successful as president. And that polio, while it was tragic the way he got it, and he could have avoided it had he had better doctors in the early days, he ultimately, it toughened him up. And so much so that he had the ability to get us through the Depression and get us through World War II. So I think that was an interesting interview. And, it taught me a lot about FDR and how he became what he did. I interviewed another interesting one was Susan Eisenhower. Asking somebody to talk about their grandfather, probably you're not expecting a lot of criticism, and she is very laudatory about him, but you learned a lot about him through the granddaughter, in the eyes of the granddaughter. And of course, one of the things I point out, I think in the book, is that when I was a boy, I looked at Eisenhower on TV. I think I was 4 or 5 or 6, And I thought, wow, this is an old man, really old. Well, I looked it up, and he was elected president when he was 62. He left presidency when he was 70. Today, 70 is a teenager. So, but he looked old at the time. Age is relative, I guess.
Well, you said that about Reagan, though, and this is is why I find you fascinating, right? Because you talk about the things that you thought were good bets. Like you thought the Colts were going to beat the Jets. You don't do that anymore. But did you really think that Carter was going to beat Reagan? Did you really think that?
Well, let me explain. I know in hindsight it looks silly, but when you work in the White House, in any White House, you tend to have people coming and telling you how great you are, and you tend to have people not telling you all the facts. For example, with Biden recently, many people were surprised that he didn't realize that he had some political problems. Maybe Carter we knew we had hostage problems. We knew we had inflation, but we always believed we'd get the hostages out because we thought the hostages would be released to Carter rather than Reagan, because we thought Reagan would be seen by the Iranians as likely to be tougher than Carter. So we were wrong. We made some big mistakes. But we did think that we had a chance, and we knew it would be close. But for example, George Herbert Walker Bush, I don't think he thought he had a chance of losing to Bill Clinton when Bill Clinton first started running. And George Herbert Walker Bush was much more experienced. Bill Clinton was inexperienced. But, you never know. Look at Hillary Clinton. You think people around her thought that she had a chance of losing to Donald Trump?
That's interesting you say that, because I see the same thing being set up. They're saying Kamala is going to win, possibly based on polling. But we heard that about Hillary, and she was dominating him. Right. And what's interesting, back then I owned a call center, and we were calling for a super PAC, and we got vitriol calling Democrats about Hillary, which was very interesting. We did very poorly raising capital for that super PAC with Hillary on the ticket, and I wasn't surprised just on the data I was getting. But the polling was that she was going to win, and it's still one of the most shocking things I've ever seen. But you mentioned that you thought Reagan was too old at the time. And
yes, well, remember, I was 31 years old at the time. So, 31 years old, I didn't know anybody that was like 69 years old. And remember, he was going to be the oldest person who had ever served as president.
Right.
Eisenhower left when he was roughly 70. Reagan was going to start at 69, at 70 really, and he was going to do it for 8 years, let's say. He was going to be 78. Right. An age nobody thought you could do that kind of thing at that age.
Why do you think RFK has got such a, what I consider to be, RFK Jr., by the way, who is a friend of mine, and I admire him a lot. I like him as a person. I spent a lot of time with him. He's a good guy, and he's sort of misunderstood. But why do you think that he has not got more traction? I was curious as to your thoughts about this, sort of him going independent, and why you think why it's not working for him.
Well, one, he hadn't run for office ever before. He wasn't an office holder. Two, many people today don't remember who his father was. In other words, I'm the chairman of the Kennedy Center, for example, and it's honoring John F. Kennedy. It turns out that 70% of Americans were not alive when John Kennedy was alive. 70% of Americans were not alive. Right. So how many Americans were really alive when Robert F. Kennedy was alive? Probably maybe 60%. So many people don't know the name as much as maybe you and I do. In addition, he has a challenge, as you know, if you know him. His voice does not work as well as you would like it to work.
Very damaged, yes.
So as a result, he can't be making public speeches that are going to be as well listened to or as maybe articulate as somebody else could do. On the other hand, he can make a big difference in the election, because as we know from the 1980 election, only 537 votes were necessary for, 537 votes were enable Bush to win Florida. And in some of these states today, if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. gets 1% or 2% of the vote, they can make a big difference.
Do you have a thesis on which way it would push? Would it be helpful for Trump or helpful for the Democrats?
Initially, it was widely thought that he would be helpful to Trump, because he has a Democratic name and he's going to take votes away from a Democratic candidate. But in recent months, probably, it's been thought that it's more likely he'll take votes away from Trump. And that's why I think some of the Trump super PACs have been putting money into campaigns that are designed to hurt him, or I mean, advertising anti-Robert F. Kennedy campaign materials. So I think that now he's probably going to hurt Trump more than he's going to hurt Harris.
I saw a headline from, I think her name is Shanahan, his VP pick. I saw a headline this morning that they were going to join the Trump campaign. I don't know if I read that correctly.
Well, there have been stories in the last couple of days that he has been trying to get a cabinet position under Trump or under Harris, and I don't know if that's true or not. But I think that he might be running short of money for one thing.
Got it. Yeah, I understand that. It's hard, I guess, to raise money when there's a scenario about you effectively not getting that draw that you expected, and people think they're probably putting money behind something that can't work out. Have you noticed that? I know I've seen some of your stuff about Richard Nixon, and I always thought that Carter was a decent man. Like some presidents kind of get a little bit of a bum rap. Like he came in after Gerald Ford, and I didn't. I mean, I was really young then, but obviously historically, I thought he would beat. I mean, I can't really say that because I was so young, but right. I think people thought, that after Nixon and Ford, it would make sense that the party, a new party would be elected. But do you feel like he got a bum rap in the beginning, like right when Reagan got elected? It felt like a little bit. There's some presidents that I think give a lot, right, to the country, and then don't get recognized till later. And he obviously did a lot of amazing things later in his life.
His presidency was 4 years. His ex-presidency was 40 years, 10 times as long. And in that 10 times as long period, he's really accomplished a lot. And some people have thought it maybe merits relooking at his presidency, and some books have come out recently about that. Look, he was trying to do too much. Today, if you get appropriation bills done, and maybe a debt limit bill, and maybe one big bill like an infrastructure bill done, you're considered successful. He was trying to get 20, 30, 40 different things done. It was too much for the Congress. Secondly, the Congress was controlled overwhelmingly by the Democrats. It wasn't an opposite party, which is different than what the situation we have today. But the Democrats who controlled the Congress tended to be more liberal than Carter, and they thought he was too conservative. And that's why Ted Kennedy ran against him for the renomination, for re-election. Carter also was an engineer, and he didn't pay attention to politics. If you said, this is good for you politically, he would ignore it. He only cared about what he thought was the right policy. He tended to be a workaholic and maybe work too much and didn't socialize enough and didn't spend enough time with other politicians. He had some flaws, and he'd only been governor of Georgia for 4 years and didn't really know anything about politics or Washington. And so he had some challenges. He was only 52 when he was elected, and he left when he was 56. So he was relatively young.
You just did it again, and I'll tell you what you did. And I was wondering if you would do this in this interview. I've noticed you do a great job at this, and I wonder if you consider yourself a teacher. But you took something where I didn't really know how to articulate it. And you said, he's a president for 4 years, he was the ex-president for 40. Do you consider yourself a teacher? Because you're able to, I've tried to figure out like what is attractive about your personality and why I'm so attracted to the idea of listening to you almost like a professor, and that is, you tend to ask the question or make a statement in a way that's really easy to understand, and it completely changes the perspective that you could have beforehand. And so I wondered, do you consider yourself a teacher?
Well, I'm not a professional teacher, but I do make a lot of speeches on history and philanthropy and business. And I realize that you need to keep the audience attentive, because people can fall asleep or they start looking at their watches. And so, I try to do it in a way that I think can relate to the average person. And I think I still have a kind of a blue collar mindset. And I recognize that blue collar people, may not be as highly educated as you and I might be, but they understand basic things if you simplify it and get it in a way that makes it understandable.
Do you still do the PBS history stuff?
Yes. There are two different PBS things. I did a program on iconic American symbols, and I did 8 of them, the Golden Gate Bridge, the little Hollywood sign, and so forth. And then I have another program where I interview people at the New York Historical Society, and then that is put on PBS. So I do that, and I'm starting another show on Bloomberg, which will be on longevity. about health, how people can live longer, and about things like, Alzheimer's or drug addiction, obesity, cancer, and basically try to get people more educated about what it can be, what it's possible to do to live a long life and healthy life.
So it's funny you brought up Alzheimer's. I licensed a drug from the University of South Florida. I have it in patients right now in phase 2B. I'm a big opponent of this. My family, my father has Alzheimer's. My mother-in-law died from it. There's a lot of things that we're making a lot of progress, but I wanted to transition, I'd be respectful of your time, about to AI. Okay, so we own a business called askROI. It actually ironically launches today, and it is a conglomeration of software that allows you to access any large language model in one area. And I will tell you that when I saw the program 6 months ago, I thought, this is not that good. When I saw it 3 months ago, I thought, okay, this is making a lot of progress. And we both know what Moore's law is, and for those who don't, it's this concept of how computer chips shrink and stuff over an 18-month period. But the nature of what's happening in advanced compute is something, and I'm only 54, you're a little bit older than me, and you've seen a lot more than me. I have not seen anything like this. I would say it's almost parabolic what AI can do. And I'm curious as to what, because you obviously see a lot, what you think of what's happening with AI.
Well, when you think back on the internet, when the internet came around and available to common usage in the late 1990s, people didn't really know how powerful it could be. Now we've built incredible companies that basically wouldn't exist without the internet. So, for example, Apple largely exists because its iPhone is really dependent on the internet. And Amazon is really dependent on the internet to some extent. Uber is dependent on the internet. And obviously Facebook dependent on the internet. So we didn't really recognize at that time how powerful it would turn out to be. AI, by contrast, everybody's so excited right now, they are maybe overdosing on AI, and maybe they think it can do everything that it will be able to do in 20 or 30 years, but maybe can't do it right away. So as an investor, I look at a lot of AI companies, and I talk to a lot of people who know AI. I spent some time recently with Sam Altman, among other people who know AI pretty well. And my conclusion is that nobody really knows for sure what the best way is to invest in this. The conventional wisdom is that you should invest in the big companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple. They're going to be, and Microsoft, they're going to be at the cutting edge and make the most money. But there's the other school of thought is that you're going to have new companies starting that come up with things you never heard of before, and you never heard of the company. So who knows which is the best way to make money. But AI is going to change the way we live. My goal is to live long enough to see the way the changes occur, because I am older than you by about 20 years. So I hope I live to see some of the AI changes. But remember, everybody listening should know that AI has been around for a long time. What's new is what's called generative AI, which is to say, taking AI, which is lots of information, distilling it down, but actually producing a product that is extraordinary. So if you use ChatGPT today, you can get an essay written that's as good as any writer in the United States could probably produce, or just about anybody. You can have things written for you that you never could have imagined that a computer could do. So that's what's changing everything. And I think there's a lot of money to be made by investing in the right AI companies. I just don't know which ones are the right ones right now.
I would say that too. I put all my money in one called askROI, and it is, I'm all in. So I'm going to live or die by this one. But I would agree with you that you can have these little upstarts that sort of change the face of it. But what I was really speaking about was the speed of which change is happening now. Do you feel like it's happening faster?
Well, sure. Well, look, speed, it's like Moore's law. What you're referring to is that Gordon Moore once said that the power of semiconductors will increase will double every 18 months, I think is what it was. And so therefore, the power of computing power, I should say, would double every 18 months. I think that was the way the law was stated.
Right.
And really, right now, I don't know if there's an equivalent for AI, but there's no doubt that AI is changing so rapidly that it's hard to know whether something you might invest in today will be relevant in 3 or 4 or 5 months. It's just changing a lot, and you've got to really be deeply involved in it to really know what's going on. At Carlyle, we have a whole team that does nothing but kind of keep up with AI and try to does things with AI with our companies. But it's a complicated thing. I've just invested in a number of companies that are in AI personally, and I've invested in some quantum computing companies, which is the next thing after AI, if you're familiar with that.
I am.
Quantum computing is thought to be, going to have computers that are thousands of times faster than the current computers. And while no quantum computer actually exists, it's an area where I'm beginning to put some money.
I do want to ask you about longevity before you go, because you said that's going to
Okay.
be your next show. I saw Kurzweil talk about that if you, and I'm going to get this wrong, sorry, but he said if you live to, I believe, 2030, the scenario for you to be living to 125 to 150 is going to increase exponentially. I kind of think that's what he said.
Yeah.
And do you think that that's the case? I mean, you're going to, about 6.5 years from now, or so, 5.5 years from now, he's claiming that the advancements with AI and healthcare are going to make it so that effectively humans can live a lot longer. I wondered if you had any commentary on what's happening
Sure.
in longevity.
Well, depending on whether you believe in evolution or God, somebody created humans to live roughly, I would say, somewhere between 70 to 100 years, assuming no cancer or other accidents. Whether you can get people to live 120 and 130 with having all your mental and physical abilities is the challenge. Because maybe you can be propped up to be 120 years old, but your brain doesn't work so well, the body doesn't work so well, it's not a great quality of life. Can we really get these human bodies that God or evolution created that are going to be able to be extended mentally and physically to the point where you enjoy the years 110, 150? And that's what I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I hope they decide it relatively quickly, though, because I'll be getting there before you.
Thank you for doing this. It meant a lot to me. I was when my producer told me you decided to come do this because of this great book, which we're thankful for the copy.
Thank you.
When my producer said this, I could not believe it. I was like, you don't understand who this person is. If you don't know who David Rubenstein is, then you don't understand business. And having you on the show is amazing.
Well,
congratulations on the Baltimore.
Thank you very much. I know who to have at my eulogy. So thank you. I hope you'll show up at my eulogy and give that eulogy, okay?
No. Do not even plan a eulogy. You need to live a long time.